Across the Spider-Verse was one of my most anticipated films of this year. The first one was absolutely amazing and everything was just great about it. Very visually pleasing to my autistic ADHD brainwaves. The animation and the way everything looked in Into the Spider-Verse was amazing. The story was great. The multiple spider people were fantastic. And this new movie Across the Spider-Verse is no different. It takes all of that and dials everything up by like 100. But how do I feel about this new sequel? I have mixed feelings on this movie. Don't get me wrong, it was amazing, definitely. Like it's a great film. Do I think it's better than the first one? Yes and no, and we will get into that and why in this video. Before we get into today's video, do you enjoy watching Spider-Man content on YouTube? If so, you found the perfect channel to join. For an affordable price of only $2 a month, you can get exclusive access to priority reply to comments, these cool custom badges I made myself, as well as some Spider-Man emojis. But wait, there's more! And lastly, you can get early access to content. If any of that sounds interesting, what are you waiting for? Join today. Thank you for your time. Back to your regularly scheduled content. So first, let's talk about what really stood out to me in this movie and what I thought was good, and then we'll get into my gripes at the end, which there's not many gripes. It's just one thing that kind of bothers me, but yeah, we'll get into it. What really stood out to me in this movie was the visuals and the different art styles and certain editing things they did in the movie. Let me tell you, it was almost as if I was watching a fan-made Spider-Man story on YouTube. Only difference is it was on the big screen and it was somehow made by Sony. There's certain editing things that they do that I thought were really interesting, and creative choices that they implemented in the movie were those similar to of things like YouTubers would do in their videos to make it more engaging, and they put a lot of very little details into the editing and the visuals, the art styles, everything. So I thought that was really interesting about the movie. And when I say the first movie was pleasing to look at, Across the Spider-Verse is even more pleasing to look at. It's a very beautiful looking film. This is one of the most visual appealing movies I've ever seen, probably. The color palette of the movie is very colorful. Everything kind of just blends in together, but not in a bad way, in a very, very nicely way, I may say. Now let's talk about some of the characters, and boy, there's a shit ton. Let's talk about just the main cast, and then we can probably talk about a couple cameos later. We will save Miles for last maybe or something, I don't know, but let's talk about Gwen for a little bit, because I feel like there's a lot to talk about with Gwen, because she gets almost as much, if not the same amount of screen time as Miles. In this movie, the characters got a little more fleshed out, which was nice. So with Gwen, we got to see what exactly happened with Gwen and her Peter and him becoming the lizard, and we find out Peter knew that she was Spider-Woman, and basically he just wanted to become something special like her, so he took the lizard serum and she essentially accidentally killed him, I think, trying to defeat him. I never read Spider-Gwen comics, but I know that's kind of what her origin is, or her story is. She loses Peter because he became the lizard. I don't know the specifics of it in the comics, but the way it was done here was very good, very emotionally compelling. And of course, her dad caught her and was about to try and arrest her, until she ended up telling him she's Spider-Woman, revealing herself to him, and that was where Miguel comes in, aka Spider-Man 2099. I love him in this movie. He's such an interesting character, generally speaking, just him in general media, but in this movie he's an absolute menace, low-key, and I kind of don't mind that, honestly. I do mind how they changed his design. The original one in the first movie was way better, but it is what it is. There's two antagonists in this movie, and I was interested in both, which is funny because we all know how that usually turns out, especially in Spider-Man films. Speaking of that second antagonist, the Spot in this movie is actually kind of funny, interesting, and menacing all in one in this movie. You guys remember that scene in the first movie where Miles threw a bagel at somebody? Yeah, this one. Yeah, that's the Spot. Bro's origin story is getting hit by a bagel. Imagine that being your villain arc. Seriously though, Miguel takes Gwen to the Spider Society thing or whatever, and she's been with them for a few months, and she finds out she can travel to any dimension, and throughout the time here and there, she thought of Miles because she missed him. They just kind of connected on a certain level. Eventually she ends up visiting him when she wasn't supposed to, which is explained later, but eventually she takes him to said Spider Society place, and Miguel is not letting Miles join because it's revealed later he technically is an anomaly. He was never supposed to become Spider-Man. Basically, the Spot was working on the collider, the one that Kingpin was using, I think, the one that exploded, and somehow brought a spider from Earth 42 to Earth 1610, where Miles is originally from. It escaped, ended up biting Miles, made him become Spider-Man. Then when the collider exploded at the end of the first movie, that turns the scientist Miles hit with the bagel into the Spot. I like the Spot's design, it was interesting, and they went for like a kind of body horror, dysmorphia kind of thing. Then eventually Miles gets explained to him that the Spider Society thing is there for when anomalies like the Spot and him happen, not necessarily him in this circumstance, but when anomalies happen, it can destroy timelines and the entire multiverse. They say that there are canon events in every universe, so like Captain Stacy dying is a canon event in almost every Spider-Man universe, or just like the police captain. And this is where it got a little interesting. They started to show a bunch of Spider-Men and women standing over whatever police captain, and I think a majority of them were Captain Stacy, but they showed Spectacular Spider-Man over Captain Stacy's dying body, which that didn't actually happen in season 1 or 2, but I guess they're alluding that it would have happened assumingly in season 3 or just any time in between the end of season 2 and up until this movie. They showed Andrew Garfield in TASM 1 over Captain Stacy's dying body. They used the Uncle Ben thing, same thing. They showed Spider-Man 1 with Tobey laying over Uncle Ben dying. The whole thing this was getting at is that essentially Miles' dad just became captain, so Miles is like, I have to go save him, but Miguel would not let him, because if Miguel lets Miles save him, it could destroy the multiverse, and it's already bad enough because he was never supposed to be Spider-Man in the first place. So that causes the whole fight and why hundreds of Spider people are going after Miles trying to stop him. One thing I really love is how they use common Spider-Man storylines and tropes in Spider-Man media, and they give us something we never actually seen before in a Spider-Man movie with these tropes and storylines that we've seen so many times already. And it's like super interesting because they essentially take the concept of Spider-Man having trauma and like that sort of being a necessary part of his story and are questioning whether or not it's actually necessary to be Spider-Man. And this movie is also about, is Miles really Spider-Man? And that's been a whole debate online for a while because he is a legacy character, but I think he is Spider-Man just as much as Peter Parker personally. I love the whole idea though of like, you know, exploring like, is the trauma that everyone else suffered as Spider-Man or Spider-Woman needed for you to be Spider-Man or Spider-Woman? Like, can you come out different? Can you change your story? Can you rewrite history? Can you be an anomaly and still work out? I think that's just a really cool idea and like concept for the film. Eventually though, we get to the scene of the train thing or whatever, and Miles finds out Gwen, Peter B. Parker, knew this whole time about like this entire thing with Miles, and we get a you knew moment, which I was like, god damn, they did it again. Not in a bad way, but it was like a gut-wrenching, like you knew, like how they did it in Spider-Man PS4. But Miles realizes that's why Gwen never visited him. Eventually he goes home using this device that like, you know, like I guess it like takes your DNA and it sends you to the correct dimension based on your DNA. The problem here is that he actually got sent to the wrong universe because he's from Earth 1610. The spider that bit him is from Earth 42, I think. So he got sent to Earth 42 while the whole Spider Society thinks he's at Earth 1610 and looking for Miles. Eventually Miles finds out he's in the wrong universe because the spider that bit him was supposed to bite the Miles of that universe, but since it didn't, Earth 42 Miles ended up siding with Uncle Aaron and becoming the prowler of that Earth. This whole story is fucking crazy, not gonna lie, and that's kind of where it ended. I love this movie a lot, but I kind of hate where it left off. But I do know that, like, you know, this is part 1 and like part 2 is Beyond the Spider-Verse, so I wonder where the story will go from here. As far as the story, I thought it was kind of cool, but it kind of left me feeling like a little empty. And the story isn't bad by any means. It's pretty interesting. I just feel like the overall story of the first movie was really good, but I do like the concepts of this movie and like what it integrates with the whole, does Spider-Man need trauma to be Spider-Man, or can you just be yourself and do your own thing? The whole like, you know, like I won't let someone else write my story. I'd rather just do my own thing, make my own story. So now let's talk about some cameos and who would have sided with who well. Spectacular Spider-Man, I thought it was like, you know, it was an okay cameo. It was cool to see him, but he only had one line, and not gonna lie, I kind of forgot that line. But it's been debated online whether or not Spectacular Spider-Man would have sided with Miguel or Miles. Josh Keaton came out recently and basically he said Spectacular Spider-Man would have the youngest Spider-Man in the multiverse. He hadn't been Spider-Man for very long, so with that, since he's young, he's very impressionable, so that's why he sided with Miguel. And the way Miguel explained everything is basically the entire multiverse is at stake. It's bigger than one or two people that died. Those one or two people that died are sacrifices for the greater good. As for Insomniac, people don't think he would side with Miguel either, and I agree, he's older and would do his best to save everyone that he can. Ben Reilly, I think Ben Reilly was a kind of controversial cameo. Like, it was definitely cool to see him, and like his art style was really cool, his costume looked great and everything, but like he was kind of written weird throughout the movie, I feel like. Nonetheless, still cool to see him. Any other like major cameos didn't really have any lines that I can think of. Like Spider-Man Unlimited didn't have a line. I can't think of any other major like cameos right now, but yeah, the cameos were okay. Insomniac Spider-Man had a line. I forgot what it was though. Oh yeah, there's a Prowler cameo from Childish Gambino, but it's live action, so that was interesting. I wonder if he's like the MCU version or the Sonyverse version. Oh, that reminds me, there's a clip going around from Spider-Man Edge of Time that I think kind of sums up exactly what the movie is about, so I'll play that here.
But now that I found out, it's
what? My job to save her? I've got enough to deal with.
You can't mean that. You can't just ignore that she's in danger.
Hey, I'm trying to focus on what's important.
What's important is not standing by and allowing someone to suffer or die because you do nothing. If you don't get that, then you don't get the first thing about being Spider-Man.
You're the one who doesn't get it, Parker. The future depends on...
My future is meaningless without her.
It's interesting because Miles and Pete did not listen to Miguel, yet they both met their evil counterparts. So like Miles meeting himself as Prowler in another universe, and then Peter in Edge of Time meeting, I think, like the evil CEO of Alchemax, which is Peter. And like the thing is, Miguel in these stories is focused on nothing but the mission itself, whereas Peter and Miles are thinking about the mission plus everybody. That reminds me of another thing. I just remembered what MCU Spider-Man said to Tony in Infinity War.
You can't be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man if there's no neighborhood.
With that, this movie overall, it was great, but was it better than the first? I don't know. I would say Across the Spider-Verse is just as good as Into the Spider-Verse. I don't think it's better. I think when I see Beyond the Spider-Verse and I see like the entire story completed at that point, I could really be like, okay, this is better than the first movie, or the first is better than both movies story-wise, but they're both still, you know, great films or whatever. Overall, Across the Spider-Verse does everything better than the first movie, besides the story so far at least. Maybe my opinion will change when, you know, we see Beyond the Spider-Verse come out. This movie did leave on a huge cliffhanger. Honestly, I think it's mainly just the cliffhanger that makes me feel a little empty or on the movie. It's like, damn. But at least I know there's another movie coming out. I had like a similar feeling with Infinity War, and like I loved Infinity War and Endgame, so you know, maybe the same thing will happen with like the story, and like it'll all make sense by the end of Beyond the Spider-Verse, and I'll love it. So what do you think of Across the Spider-Verse and my thoughts on it? What are you hoping happens in Beyond the Spider-Verse? Make sure you comment your opinion down below so I can discuss all that with you in the comment section. Thank you for taking time out of your day to click on this video. If you're new to the channel, I cover Spider-Man related scoops, rumors, leaks, confirmations for the games, movies, TV shows, and I try to upload as much as I can. So if any of that interests you, hit the subscribe button. We're on the road to 3,000 subscribers. If you want more of this type of content, leave a like on the video. Don't forget to check out my latest video on the left if you haven't already. I hope you have had a good day and that you enjoyed the video. Until next time.